for Diddy to come on stage, pat him on his ass, and then make the statement to people in the world that can't nobody call me Sean but Jay-Z.
How does Jay-Z sit down with Gayle King and she not ask him one question about the intersection between him and Aaliyah and Robert Kelly? This is insane that people keep refusing to see what's right there.
Let me ask you something. Did you notice what wasn't in that documentary? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The Netflix Diddy documentary didn't exactly hold back. They talked about Jennifer Lopez, they revisited the notorious B.I.G., they centered Cassie. Basically, anyone even remotely connected to Diddy caught some level of heat, except one name. No photos, no mentions, no archival footage, not even a passing reference. Jay-Z is completely missing. And that's not normal. This isn't some random side character we're talking about. Jay-Z has been tied to Diddy for decades. Business, industry circles, public appearances, the whole ecosystem. In a documentary that's digging into power, influence, and control inside hip-hop, his absence sticks out like a red flag. And here's the key point. Documentaries don't forget people at that level, especially not Netflix documentaries. If Jay-Z was never meant to be part of the story, why do so many insiders say there was an entire segment about him in the first place? That's where things start getting uncomfortable, and exactly where this goes next. Now, once people started asking why Jay-Z was missing, something interesting happened behind the scenes. A statement quietly went out. Jay-Z's legal team made it clear that he and Diddy were never really that close, that their relationship was exaggerated, that they were more like distant industry associates than real friends. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, right? Hollywood is full of fake friendships, right? People pose together, do business, and move on. But here's the problem. That explanation only works if the public record supports it, and it doesn't. Because there are years of footage, events, and insider accounts that paint a very different picture, one that's way harder to dismiss as just business. And this is where things shift from speculation to contradiction. Because when Diddy first started facing serious allegations, people who were actually around him didn't stay quiet. One of those people was Gene Deal, someone who wasn't guessing from the outside, but watching things unfold up close. When Gene heard the claim that Jay-Z and Diddy weren't close, he didn't dance around it. He flat out rejected it. Not with rumors, not with theories, but with specific memories and public moments anyone can look up. And before I break down what he said, I want you to hear it exactly how he said it. Because this is where the "we were never that close" narrative starts falling apart.
Diddy and Jay-Z, they was close enough that they wasn't playing basketball, they wasn't playing baseball. They wasn't playing football, and they wasn't playing hockey or soccer for Diddy to come on stage, pat him on his ass, and then make the statement to people in the world that can't nobody call me Sean but Jay-Z. Now, I don't know what kind of statement, and I can't say, I wish I could say half a homo, but I know I can't say it, but I don't know what kind of half a homo that is. And you trying to say that you're not close to somebody. You coming on stage, patting them on their ass, and then you making a broad statement to the public, can't nobody call me Sean but Sean Carter. And I heard Jay-Z say the same thing about them. But they were so close that they had matching white girls together.
Let's slow that down for a second, because that wasn't a throwaway comment. What Gene Deal is describing isn't two guys casually knowing each other through work. He's talking about public behavior, stages, crowds, moments meant to be seen. When someone comes on stage, puts their hands on you, and then makes a statement to the entire world about exclusivity, only one person gets to call me this, that's not random, that's signaling. And signaling matters in this industry because people at that level are obsessive about optics. Nothing happens publicly by accident, especially not when cameras are rolling and reputations are currency. So when Jay-Z's team later says, "we weren't really that close," it creates a problem because now we're dealing with contradictions. Either the public moments meant nothing, or the distance narrative came after, not before. And that's usually what happens when situations get uncomfortable. Another detail Gene mentions that most people gloss over: the familiarity. Inside jokes, personal references, knowing details that casual associates simply wouldn't know. You don't talk like that about someone unless you've spent real time around them, off camera, off record, off schedule. And that's why this matters so much in the context of the documentary. Because if Jay-Z and Diddy really were that close, then Jay-Z's complete absence from a documentary about Diddy stops looking like coincidence. It starts looking like containment. Not proof of wrongdoing, not confirmation of guilt, but a clear sign that certain relationships were considered too risky to even touch. And once you accept that, the next part makes a lot more sense. Because this wasn't the only time a conversation involving Jay-Z suddenly disappeared. In fact, one of the most talked about interviews involving his name didn't just get criticized, it got erased. And that's where this takes a much sharper turn. Now here's where this stops being about one documentary and starts looking like a pattern, because this wasn't the first time a conversation involving Jay-Z suddenly disappeared. Not long ago, Jaguar Wright sat down for a televised interview with Piers Morgan. This wasn't a podcast, this wasn't YouTube gossip. This was a mainstream TV platform known for letting guests speak freely, even when things get uncomfortable. And at first, that's exactly what happened. Jaguar started explaining why people inside the industry are terrified to speak. She talked about power, she talked about protection, and then she started naming names. That's when things changed. Because shortly after the interview aired, clips started circulating online. People were reacting, debating, asking questions, and then, quietly, that segment was gone. Not demonetized, not age restricted, removed. Now let's be very clear here. This isn't about whether Jaguar Wright is right or wrong. This isn't about taking her claims as fact. The real question is much simpler and much more important. If what she said was meaningless, why did it need to disappear? Platforms leave up false statements all the time. They leave up outrageous opinions. They leave up things they openly disagree with. They usually don't erase conversations unless lawyers get involved or pressure shows up. And that's why this moment is so relevant to the Netflix situation. Because once is coincidence, twice is awkward, but when multiple platforms start cutting or deleting content that circles the same names, people are going to notice. And before I break down why this interview mattered so much, I want you to hear exactly what was said, in her own words, before it vanished.
How does Jay-Z sit down with Gayle King and she not ask him one question about the intersection between him and Aaliyah and Robert Kelly? This is insane that people keep refusing to see what's right there.
What Jaguar Wright did in that interview wasn't just rant or shock value. She was doing something far more dangerous in this industry. She was connecting names. Not vaguely, not hypothetically, but in a way that made people uncomfortable enough to start asking follow-up questions. And that's usually where the line is. Because there's a big difference between someone saying the industry is corrupt and someone pointing at specific power structures and saying this is how it works. Whatever the reason, somebody decided it was safer for that conversation to not exist. And when you line that up with what happened in the Netflix documentary, a pattern starts forming. Because both situations follow the same sequence. A conversation involving Jay-Z surfaces, it raises uncomfortable questions, the platform quietly removes or avoids it, no official explanation follows. This is exactly why people close to the documentary say episode 4 became a problem. Not because of one claim, not because of one guest, but because it reportedly stacked multiple voices, timelines, and insider accounts in a way that made ignoring the topic impossible. And that's when Netflix allegedly stepped in. Because at that point, the question stopped being, is this true, and became, is this worth the fallout? And according to multiple insiders who've spoken on it since, Netflix decided it wasn't. But here's the part most people don't realize. Cutting episode 4 didn't make the questions disappear. It just pushed them onto platforms where people are willing to speak without corporate approval. And one of the voices that keeps resurfacing, whether people believe her or not, is the same voice Netflix allegedly didn't want centered in that episode. Which brings us to these specific claims that reportedly made executives uncomfortable enough to pull the plug. This is where things reportedly crossed the line. Because according to people familiar with the cut material, episode 4 wasn't dangerous because of one allegation, it was dangerous because of how many uncomfortable stories pointed in the same direction. And at the center of most of them was Jaguar Wright. Now, whether you believe her or not is beside the point. The issue is this. She wasn't making vague statements. She wasn't speaking in metaphors. She was naming timelines, ages, locations, and people. That's when platforms get nervous. One of the biggest red flags for Netflix was reportedly the discussion around hidden settlements and NDAs. Not proof of crimes, but proof of silence agreements. Because NDAs don't mean guilt, but they do mean risk. risk of lawsuits, risk of reputational damage, risk of being dragged into battles that last years. Episode 4 allegedly explored how common these agreements are in the music industry, especially when young artists are involved and careers depend on staying quiet. And this is where the conversation shifted toward power imbalance. That's also why claims involving artists like Rihanna and Aaliyah were considered especially risky. Not because there's definitive proof of wrongdoing, there isn't, but because discussing minors, contracts, travel, and late-night meetings in the same breath creates legal exposure even if everything is framed as alleged, and Netflix doesn't take those chances. From a corporate perspective, it's simple. You can document what's already been proven, you can revisit what's already settled, but you don't amplify unresolved claims tied to people with massive legal firepower. So instead of debating those claims publicly, they cut the segment entirely. And here's the part that keeps nagging at people. If the claims were completely baseless, airing them, with disclaimers, would have been easy to dismantle. But when the cost of even hosting the conversation feels too high, silence becomes the safer option. Which leads to the next layer of this story. Because when people do speak up, whether they're believed or not, something strange tends to happen next. Their careers stall, their access disappears, or they get painted as unstable. And that's not just one person saying it, it's a pattern. And once you start seeing that pattern, the final pieces begin to click into place. Take Killer Mike. The night he won multiple Grammys should have been a victory lap, the kind of moment artists dream about. Instead, he ended the night in handcuffs over a minor incident that many insiders say could have been handled quietly. No charges that matched the spectacle, no explanation that justified the timing, just a public disruption on the biggest night of his career. Then there's Kimberly Thompson, a trained musician, a hand-picked member of an elite touring band, someone with real credentials. She went to court and filed a restraining order against Beyoncé, making claims that many dismissed immediately as extreme. And that may be fair. Courts exist to sort truth from fiction. But here's the part that's harder to ignore. After that filing, her career in the industry didn't just slow down, it stopped. No major gigs, no public support, no quiet comeback. And stories like this aren't isolated. They form a pattern people whisper about but rarely say out loud. Speak up, and you're labeled unstable. Push harder, and you're frozen out. Keep going, and you become a cautionary tale. That's why so many insiders choose silence. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've seen what happens to the people who do. And once you understand that fear, the Netflix decision starts making more sense. Because airing episode 4 wouldn't just upset one person, it would challenge a system that survives on quiet compliance. And platforms don't like fighting systems, they like avoiding them. Which brings us to the final question, the one this whole video has been circling. If so many conversations keep getting cut, erased, or avoided, who actually decides what the public is allowed to hear? That's where this ends. So here's where everything comes together. This video was never about proving any single claim. It was never about deciding who's right or wrong. It was about something much simpler and much more unsettling. Who gets questioned and who doesn't? In a documentary that exposed powerful figures, revisited uncomfortable history, and wasn't afraid to name names, one of the most influential people in the entire industry was completely absent. Not criticized, not defended, not even acknowledged. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to believe, but I am here to ask you this. Do you think Netflix cut that segment because it wasn't credible, or because it was too complicated, too risky, and too powerful to deal with? Let me know what you think, because this conversation doesn't end here, and neither does the footage people keep saying exists. I'll see you in the next one.